East Coast
How
someplace?
how is everyone doing tonight? We're live with Dave Levinson and Eric Akaba. I'm not sure if I
Ak-
pronounced that right.
Akaba.
Akaba, okay.
Yep.
Uh, when did you get your first monkey tail?
Well, uh, I've kind of worked with them since about 1986. Uh, I was an employee at a large reptile importer. It's not around anymore, but one of my tasks was feeding and taking care of the animals too. And that's when they just started coming in low numbers. They went from very rare to available to extremely available and back to rare again. And but 1986, I think the first babies I got were probably 1990 or baby single.
So in that period when they were kind of scarce to flooded to scarce, how long was that?
So during the, I guess, 90s, probably the 90s, they came in large numbers around especially in the U.S. Um, and many people, I hate the term they used back then because they were very common or they became very common, and some folks started using the terminology of like junk animals, referring to be like a tokay gecko skink, right? And I said, well, I think they're both very beautiful. They just they didn't see the value in it from a captive breeding money making venture, but it being a single an animal that is an island species and has one baby, um, uh, and they're surely would become scarce at some point, and as they have been. And generally, one baby a year is the average of what a bonded pair is going to have.
Okay. With the exportation of those, did they have limitations on how many they were allowing out every year?
Well, and I spoke to folks at U.S. Fish and Wildlife about it because they were in the last X number of years they were allowing so-called farm raised and ranched animals, but apparently, and there's some writings about it about they apparently went to go search out these ranches and farms, and they came up with zero. They didn't find one existing, so. It was speculated that many, I can't say all, but many of these so-called farm and ranched animals that came in the last 10 years were just wild-caught animals being put under those permits. So captive breeding, it's, in the U.S., I don't know, I think I know about 10 real full-time breeders of Corucia. Um, and there's more every day, but I think there's less than 10 that have multiple colonies. There's a lot of folks out there that may have one pair or single animals, quite a few of those, but as far as folks that produce on a regular basis and keep multiple colonies and manage them wisely, and it's pretty rare still. Even within our group, I don't know if you're members of, I think Alex, you are a member of our Prince Tail skink group of Solomon Islands. I think our second membership other than U.S. is out of where is it now? It's out of UK. It was Canada for the longest time, and now it's UK is our second largest membership group. So
And I would think, with the popularity of them growing over time, the group would keep growing.
well, we know so much more about them. When I started with them in '86, the only people who had them were zoos, and the zoos really did not maintain excellent records. Uh, uh, they may have bred, but there was very little information on courtship and everything else, and gestation. And today in time, the trios, we were speaking earlier about folks that like to do large ratios of like one male with, I don't know, a dozen females. And with this species, I have not found that to be conducive. Um, my general setup is 1.2 setups. That seems to be that sweet spot right there. The females get bigger, but it gives each female a break every other year, because it's not too often where my males breed both females simultaneously.
So he usually picks a favorite and he sticks with her all through the season, or do you think one develops and the other one doesn't?
I'm not sure. It's because like a lot of cases, breeding only happens if the female says it's going to happen, and with this species, they have to like each other. It's not like breeding dogs where you just stud the male out, and I often get calls about people wanting to send their female over to breed with my males, and it doesn't work that way. If it has, I don't know about it. They actually they're very social animals to start off with, and let me give you a story that will probably help a lot of people. And when I sell babies, I'm not really a fan of sending them to a solitary home, a solo home where it's going to live by itself for its whole life. And it's not because I'm trying to sell them a second one, because I rarely ever sell females. They're extremely social animals, and they learn and everything from the parents. So when I remove the babies at about a year to 2 years old from the parents, from circulus, they go into a juvenile group. So they go from living with adults to living with other younger animals like themselves. But they live a long time.
So when you move them into the smaller juvenile groups, how many do you keep together?
Well, depending on the size of the cage, again, they have to be very very compatible, which with babies, it's not typically a difficult task. And what the odds I'm trying to play is that there's got to be at least one pair with the 6 babies. Usually I'll put 6 babies in a cage, and at about 2 years old, 3 years old sometimes, the sex becomes very obvious with this species.
Okay. Has there been any talk about how to possibly sex babies? I know we have the same trouble with all the other syncoides, but I mean, anything for sexing them at a young age, or it's really just got to raise them up?
Well, there's talks on facilities doing DNA testing like they do with birds.
Sure.
I have not found one locally by me that does that. A vet tech once told me that they can do saline injection to the base of the tail to, put pressure and invert the hemipenes. I know an individual that's a master at popping penises. I generally don't recommend it. It's like trying to pop hemipenis out of a chondro python, right? The chances of damaging that spine are pretty high. And over the 3 decades, I've seen the results of it. And one was my animal. The lower spine gets damaged. You don't notice it right away, but over time, and if it's related or not related, it's hard to tell. But I'm typically not in a rush, to sex them, because I don't sell the babies at birth. I think they need that parental, development raised with the circulus, and then I generally part with the babies at a year or 2 years old.
Have any vets tried contrast like radiography, where they'll put like dye in to see if it's and then do an X-ray to see if they could see the hemipenes or not?
On a baby, it would be really tough because it's really tiny. Maybe at 4-year-olds, it could be, but I actually even spoke to one person that was probing blue tongues, that thought they can probe a prehensile, and not on one of mine anyway. I'm not generally in a rush. It becomes pretty obvious, and one of the other clues, and you don't read about this, is the father will tell you. He'll tell you it's a male. When that baby gets to be about 2 years old, maybe 3, if it's a male, he'll attack his own son. He won't attack his daughters.
So you can only keep one male in a group. Anything else, you're probably gonna have to deal with a little bit of battling.
Well, if you had an extremely large walk-in cage, I think that could be possible, but one male is going to have to take a step down because the males are pretty ruthless as far as establishing dominance. Um, if they're young males, right, if they're like brothers, say you have a set of twins or babies raised together and they turn out to be both males. I've had remember I was saying I raised 6 babies together, and I have a group right now where at least 3 of those 6 are males, and they're still getting along, and I think they're, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years old now. They're still okay, but at some point, one of the males will or females will reach maturity, and that typically is what triggers it. It's the females.
What size cage are you raising up 6 babies in? And I know you might go a little bit bigger. Is there a minimal size you'd recommend?
Well, and that's a very common question. So there's a difference whether it's a compatible pair or a not very compatible pair. If they're compatible, you can get away with smaller cages. If you had a walk-in cage with uncompatible pairs, or you won't get away with that at all. And so they have to be very compatible. So even females, even 2 females, actually have to be compatible to live in the same environment. Because I got one group it's just a 1.1 pair, and it's not because of the male not accepting another female; it's the female not willing to accept another female.
So it sounds like you got to get pretty good at reading the behavior before you.
It is. It's a daily thing because things being fine goes from not being fine real quick. So you have to kind of keep good notes. Because sometimes an animal getting beat up, it'll go and hide and die. So you got to remove it. Like I've had recently in the last year or two, I had to remove a young male before he even turned 6 because the group was attacking the baby. So for whatever reason, it did not accept the baby.
So early on, caging was probably pretty basic. You guys probably built it a lot yourself. How has caging changed throughout the years to kind of better your experience and make it easier?
Yeah. So caging, and we're talking earlier with somebody about caging because I have cages I've used from the 80s. I'm still using. I had to modify them drastically, and I used to use vinyl coated 1 inch by ½ inch wire so they can climb all the way around it. But it's very difficult to maintain humidity. And I'm in California, so it's not like living in Florida or Hawaii where the humidity's there. So California is pretty much a desert as far as our dryness goes, unless you're by the beach. So those cages I still use, but I enclose the cage so I can keep the humidity in. So I'm at Tamara Design Cages right now, and he designed my last cage, and he's working on some new ones for me that are waterproof on the bottom, first of all, and the PVC cages, and they're waterproof, and it's situating those vents in the right place. So you don't want to lose too much humidity, and often with that statement, some people think bad ventilation is good humidity, which it's not. You need good ventilation, but still good humidity.
Okay. So are you, is your ventilation lower in the cage then? Or when you say your ventilation is done a little differently?
So generally put a vent low. So taller cages work out, vertical cages work out typically nicer than horizontal cages. And not criticize anyone with horizontal style cages because I have some still that work really well. The key is this animal needs to get up off the bottom, right? They need a means of climbing up to something that's not on the bottom. They're not happy when they're laying on the bottom and have no choice. So I have vertical cages that tend to work out nicer. I like the opportunity of offering a thermal gradient. So radiant heat panels. I've used every heat from ceramic Perlco heaters to incandescent bulbs to deep heating elements, and I'm right back to radiant heat panels because with this species, they don't really like it that hot. I think one of the big pitfalls people do is keeping them too hot. I'm targeting typically 75 to about 85 degrees ambient temperature with a hot spot, maybe 88, right? Below 90 is my goal, to have that hot spot below 90 degrees, which is at the very top. And then with the taller cage, it can be, sheesh, at nighttime, it could be 70 degrees, which they're perfectly fine at that, overnight.
Okay. Using any computer fans or anything inside to kind of get a little bit of airflow?
I have in the room, so I actually have a skink room, one room that's it's just skinks. And and I was just telling Dale, I said, I've got thermostats in some cages and some thermostats in the room with the probe. I use some thermostats designed by the marine tropical fish hobby. So that has two sockets, one for heat and one for a fan to cool. And so when the room, and hopefully my room doesn't get above 80. So during the summer, if the room ever got above, I don't know, 88, it knocks off all the heat sources. It turns them all off. So instead of putting a thermostat in dozens of cages, I have one room thermostat on a long power strip that knocks out all the heat sources. It leaves the UV, the fluorescent UVB bulbs on, and I even have a backup. If it really got hot, it would knock those out too. So I have a 2-stage thermostat, and then even with UVB, I have it multi-stage too. So I always had a problem going from exposing these animals in complete darkness to complete bright light. So I have a first stage, which is a very dim light. Next stage, after an hour, it turns on to more intense light. And then when it goes off, it goes reverse. And then, of course, nighttime cooling thermostats are very important. We didn't have those in the 80s. There weren't thermostats set up like that.
Now, for your cages, since they need a bit of humidity, have you ever thought putting like PVC pipe drainage? That way you could actually spray it a bit, and then if you overspray it, the excess water will kind of drain out the bottom.
Yes, that's one of the designs that Tamara Design makes. He has a fogger and mister with a drain at the bottom and a catch. I'm still kind of old school. If you haven't already picked up on that, I still use hand sprayers and, not.
I think you might have froze there a little bit.
It's happening a little bit. We'll give it a second. Well, we'll keep trading off questions. You go, I go. Deal?
Okay.
Oh, are we in?
Yep, there we go.
Oh, there we go. So I still like to hand spray. I kind of equate it to dog training. So, because getting sprayed with water is a positive for this species, and I'm, I don't want to get laughed at again, but I think that they're aware of that I am the supplier of this thing they love so much called rain. So, and I can show you, well, at some point, maybe I'll show you the how kind of aggressive animals calm down when I spray them.
It works with people too.
Yes, a lot of people don't want to fight in the rain.
So, Alex, can we jump into a little bit of breeding or a little bit of seasonal stuff like that, or do you want to get to that later in the episode?
That sounds great.
Yeah. So, step by step, tell us about how you used to do it, then how you started doing it later on, and now what you do now, because I'm sure you've made a lot of changes over the years.
Right. So, at the beginning, there was virtually no information on this species. A little bit of natural history information, where they're found, and a lot of, opinions out there. There weren't any books. At some point, Philippe de Beaujolais wrote a really, still to this day, very valuable care and maintenance manual, and that it still applies. But in the breeding part of it was something that there wasn't a lot of documentation, even at the zoo level, but realizing when the female is pregnant, right? Because their breeding is going to happen at nighttime and in the dark. It doesn't happen too often in bright light. I had the advantage because my original cage, I started off with one trio, and the cage was right next to where I slept. So the ruckus going on at night, the male chasing the females and nibbling on her neck and hip area, and I got to observe this breeding behavior, courtship behavior. I thought they were attacking. The male was attacking the female, but it wasn't severe bites. Usually 6 to 8 months on the average. It's because I don't think they breed one time, and but 6 to 8 months generally takes to produce the one healthy baby. And then the variety I'm working with primarily is Corucia zebrata. Many taxonomists or some recognize a second subspecies that comes from a northern territory of the range that gets a little bit larger. So the babies after 6, 8, 9 months, and at the beginning, I couldn't even tell if the female was pregnant, because really healthy females will generally be pretty fat with this species. And one day I wake up to change the water, and all the adults lunge at me. They're normally friendly adults. They go full force and want to attack me, which today we know that to be a great sign that there's a baby. But even on stillbirth, unfortunately, with the stillbirth, they will still defend that still baby. Hey, do you guys want to see? I bought one. I thought instead of just looking at my mug, I can show you.
You kind of cut in and out a little bit. I couldn't understand that.
He's going to take us on a tour and let us see what he's actually doing over there.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, yeah. So, I don't know. Let's see if I can get her in the shot here. Okay, can you see that? Okay. Anyway.
There we go.
Yeah. So this one's only about 2 years old. It's a sexable male.
Now, when you say sexable, are you looking for head structure, body structure? What are some signs?
Multiple things. I think going by just one thing physically, it can be very deceiving, and so there's folks that are really good about popping penises. I choose not to do it because there's no rush for me to do that. But on a mature male, sexually mature male, and it's not always by age. You can have a male that's 3 that you can't tell the sex on, and this one at I think maybe 1.5 years, I was able to sex it. Behaviorally is one thing. His father kind of indicating by kind of banishing from the group, from the circulus, was the other way. But I don't know if you can see. Well, it's too young. There's a pretty good hemipenal bulge here. And the way I routinely tell people, get them on a flat surface, and they got to be really relaxed, because this species, when they're stressed, they can actually suck their hemipenises in. Okay. Sounds bizarre, and again, that was one of the things that some of the zoo stuff laughed at me about, but it's true. And the compatibility.
Why do you think they do that?
What's that?
Why do you think they suck them in?
I don't know. It's hard, and I've noticed it right away with the young males doing that when his father came up, and of course the 2-year-old male is reaching maturity, and I don't know. I think they go by scent heavily, and I can, and I've had cases where I handle one male. I don't wash my hands. I go in the cage to a normally friendly male, and he attacks me. So they go by scent pretty heavily, and those little subtle little tongue flicks typically have some kind of meaning behind it too. So.
Well, maybe the inverting or pulling them in is just for protection. Whether they think if there's a predator around, they're about to get into it with a male, it'd probably be pretty easy to have that tail get damaged. Maybe there's some thought process there in Mother Nature to pull them inside them.
Yeah, it's possible. We're still. I learn something about them every time I do something with them, and sucking in those hemipenises. You're not going to read that anywhere. It's something at some of these, talks that I'm almost shy to even suggest it. But they're but not all young males will do that. Some of the young males, there's young males that are 5 and 6 years old that physically look like females, and of course I have females that even look like males. So it's going by more than one characteristic. You can't. It's very difficult to go just rely on one.
Okay. So back to just a little more of the discussion of breeding. A lot of your colonies are being raised up together. Do you ever have success introducing a pair just during the breeding season?
So here's something I do differently now that I really didn't pay much attention to. I would, match make all year round and try to get them to match up. But I would pull females from maybe a non-productive breeding situation, and I try not to do that now. So I do it after breeding season's over now, and because there could be some potential issues if you're pulling them, because you can potentially have a pregnant female that you're pulling away, right, from its group, or pulling a male and sticking with. But I introduce them a little bit differently, and I utilize a spare shower and introduce them that way, and this goes right back into them not wanting to be so aggressive when they're wet. So I rain on them and put them in the bathtub's also my quarantine area where I quarantine them too. If I ever get some rescues or animals that were turned over to me, they go right into the tub and they're quarantined there. And that shower is set up with heat lamps and UVB and branches and everything. So introducing them that way. But an animal raised in solitary, it's a tough job. I've got about 2 or 3 individuals that were turned over to me that were raised in solitary for, I think one of them, 15 years. It's terrified. It's terrified of even a little baby. So it's I don't know if that female is ever going to breed, or she's which goes right back to they need not to be in a single situation like that. It could be for a short while, but long term, and never ever seen another one for, especially if you want to breed them down the road. They really should have a second animal there.
How hard is it to determine when the beginning of the breeding season is?
Well, I see the trigger when it starts warming up. In the Solomon Islands, they breed all year round because it's a very temperate place. But they do get warmer seasons and cooler seasons. But their hot is not hot and their cold is not cool. It's very similar to the temperatures experienced in Hawaii. But historically, the babies I produce are generally born as early as October and maybe as late as April. So, but the majority of them are produced right around December, January.
Is the community all cycling around the same time? Is everybody getting their babies around the same time? Or is it kind of, if someone lives in Florida, you're going to notice it's different. If someone lives in Wisconsin, it's different. Yes. What do you guys notice?
I think it's heat. I think it's the heat supplied to them. And I was another discussion about this. because my cages generally are going to be warmer during the winter when I'm using heat bulbs. During the summertime, I'm not really using a whole lot of heat bulbs or heat, heat panels or heating elements. So they're typically warmer. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. There's folks in Florida that have the luxury of keeping them outdoors for the majority of the year, which is pretty steady. But in the wild, they can have babies all year round. I don't know what the cycle is because it's all one. All the skinks are in one room. Well, except one group.
Well, and see for like blue tongues, like they'll start lowering the temp to try to start getting everything ready and brumate them. Is there any brumation period at all, like when it's colder? No. Okay.
No, they're pretty much active all year round, and they tend. I have many that lose weight. They're losing weight at the end of the year, wintertime. They lose weight, but the females, when they produce follicles, eggs, sometimes they pass unfertilized eggs, which can be pretty devastating. They can lose a lot of weight, and some come out of it in poor condition. So even producing a baby, imagine an animal that generally weighs, say, 500 to 800 grams, producing a baby that's 100 to 175 grams. So I think the similarity would be like an adult human producing a 30-pound baby. The baby comes out fully formed and ready to go. So they're just mini, replicas of their parents.
Has there been much study of these guys in the wild, like whether or not they might bond for life with another mate? If babies typically stay close to the parents for a long, extended period of time after birth? Like, what kind of stuff do we know about that?
So there was a study done. I don't know how they determined it, if they put trackers on them or what, but I did read a recent study on the movements of these animals when they're born. And it turned out that within one tree, they're surrounded by relatives, cousins, half cousins, uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, and they're not traveling very fast or very far. And they're very much like a sloth in the way they move. They're very awkward on the ground. So it's not like an iguana. You might find an iguana a couple hundred yards away, 200 yards, a mile away from where they were born. But these animals, the study was kind of indicating they didn't travel very far. They're found in these incredible, trees and forest setups, and they're just surrounded by relatives, which makes you think their genetic diversity must be very incredible.
Would it be incredible? I mean, for any island species, I think genetic diversity isn't that diverse. And if this species spends most of the time in one tree with the rest of the family, It sounds like there'd be a lot of inbreeding.
Yeah, you would think. And so that's why when you think about it, all these morphs that are in favor by a lot of folks today, and I'm not criticizing it, but the morphs many times are the result of interbreeding. Albinos, two-heads, scaleless, right? Hypo, but many times, especially albino, that's a result of interbreeding, in which this species, there really aren't any strong morphs. Right? There's animals that would maybe a little bit different head pattern, a little bit different body pattern, but there really isn't a drastic morphs like you see even within blue tongues. I'm working toward melanistic animals, but I don't know, an animal that produces one baby at a time, the odds get lowered pretty greatly.
And how long until they hit sexual maturity? What age?
Well, the youngest I had a male breed was 3, and then when the baby was born, he was 4, and the female, the youngest she was bred was 4, and then when the baby was born, she was 5.
Is it better to wait till the female's a little older?
I would wait. Generally, on young animals breeding, it usually results in a slug. The first attempt. but I would wait. This animal that I didn't realize they were even mature enough. This was one of the baby groups, right? That produced the baby, right? They were, 3-year-olds that were in together. So that would, and then the size on the baby was very small too.
Okay.
That was the one. I don't know if you follow me at all. They're generally born at about 100 grams or larger, up to about 175 grams. I had a successful, viable baby that was 28 grams. That was about the size of a baby blue tongue.
Okay. You think that was a preemie baby? Maybe there was a twin and the twin didn't make it, so it made for one being smaller than the other?
That was what was speculated, but since the parents are so little, and it would be pretty tough for them to have a second baby in there somewhere. But it's very possible. But it was tiny. I couldn't even believe it was in there. I thought someone slipped in a pink tongue in there or something.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Did it end up growing to a full adult size?
No, he's still small for his age. It's that animal is the one that I post that's almost black. He turns lighter and darker, but he's a very dark skink. Yeah.
Interesting.
He's not that big for his age. He's still very small.
So, not only the genetic diversity in the wild probably being a little limited with this species, but what we have here is probably a little limited. What's the mindset going into a breeding season when it comes to pairings? Like, how are you guys, what's your thought process going into the year? Which ones you want to be together? Like, how are you making these decisions?
Well, every day I kind of evaluate each group pair, even the babies. I'm evaluating whether I need to pull anybody, whether I need to, maybe, because even though I have a large number of groups, maybe only 2/3 of them actually produce babies regularly. There's some groups that are very sporadic. Of course, I got a trio that's 38 years old. All the parents are 38 years old, and they're still producing. So I don't know how long blue tongues live, but and we're not sure how long they truly live. I wish the Zeus had better records on it, but the zoos have had them more than 38 years, but I don't see any strong documentation that they have animals that are over 38 years old.
Well, I feel like the reptile hobby in general is still such a young hobby compared to other animal keeping that a lot of those records and a lot of different species just don't exist.
Yes, well, this was all pre-computer too, so a lot of young folks, they don't know what it's like to live without computers, and everything was on in a folder and written by pencil and paper, and as each staff turns over or curators, I think those records may get lost, and some of the past keepers, will maybe remembered, in their head. There was a zoo that told me they had a 50-year-old animal, and I don't know. It could be possible, but and I've been to this zoo, and I don't remember them having this species even 30 years ago. So unless it was behind the scenes, of course.
I think it'd be possible. Some blue tongues, they'll live in their mid-30s, and shinglebacks, some of those will live like 40 years. So, monkey tails are kind of a slower growing species in general that could have a long life that we might never ever know if, it's like you said, not many people keep records, and then a lot of people don't always have their animals the whole life.
Yep. So that's why some of these animals I have, including tortoises, I think some of them were that I'm the third owner of, where the previous owners had passed away, and so I like keeping those kind of records, and so and each one of my animals has a number, a color code, and a number, so I know exactly which one it is, and so even ones that I do sell, I usually accompany it with the number, so if ever they bring it back, I know exactly which group it came from.
Okay. So it seems like every once in a while there's a new island in the Solomon Islands that they discover these guys. Or I think those are some of the rules that makes it okay to have new ones come in the country. When you find or hear that there's new animals coming in, do you ever reach out and try to get new stuff, or are you happy
Yeah,
just collecting within the United
uh,
States?
I do both. There was a duration where I didn't want to pick up any more imports with the threat of introducing a problem to my stable and healthy and stabilized group. And over the years, I picked up animals that came out of Melita and various other islands. And there's a lot of little islands. And I don't think people realize how many little tiny islands are there. And some of the islands aren't even owned by the Solomons where they exist. They're owned by Papua New Guinea, which, as far as I know, I don't know if animals legally come out of those countries, out of Papua New Guinea, and reptiles. I don't know if that's true or not. But there are animals that allegedly have. The northern species comes out of Bougainvillea, and Bougainvillea is not even owned by the Solomons, which is one of the larger varieties. But depending on which article you read, some of those articles indicate that the northern variety is smaller. So I haven't found that to be true. I'm guessing maybe the notes got mixed up somewhere.
I always make that joke in the hobby. We play telephone. By the time it gets from the first guy to the last guy, it's completely different.
Right, because all of the Solomon Islands, there's only one airport, regardless what island you catch them on. It all gets shipped out of Guadalcanal. And it can't, as you can imagine, there aren't regular flights out of there. And going from one island to the next island, it's not like a jet flying you over to every island hopping. So I figure an imported animal from an island other than Guadalcanal, it's got a long journey before it lands into the U.S.
Are there any localities from the specific islands around?
Well, there's some. There's various groups out there that have a pretty good key on identifying animals from island to island. But even within island, I worked at an importer where hundreds came in, and I could tell you, imports out of one island was incredible. There were some with yellow heads, some with red heads, some that were striped, some that were spotted, some with checkered pattern. They're very diverse in physical appearance. Doesn't mean that they're other subspecies, of course. They're just like humans. Humans from one country can vary greatly. So I tend to think it's just varieties within one species. But I do pair up animals who look alike, though. So because when someone says this animal came out of Melita or came out of Bougainvillea, you're taking somebody's word at it unless you caught it yourself. So that's not. It's typically not where they were shipped out of. There's I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 islands named here that were they've been found, and that's the bigger island. There's even smaller islands that exist.
Are there any characteristics? So you said typically you try to keep ones together that look similar.
Right.
Has there been a characteristic you've line bred over the years to try to really, make the yellows more yellow on the head? Anything like that?
Yeah. So my first effort was with a male, and that was all the focus was on him. He was allegedly the first true and possibly the only true hypomelanistic prehensile male. He was like the color of vanilla ice cream. He had gray eyes, clear nails, a white head, and for the first 20 years, he was the male that bred every one of the females. And back then, we didn't know the correct ratio. So he originally was set up in a 1.2, which grew to 1.10. And long and behold, he only wanted to breed with his original 2 females. And even with the removal of his favorite females, he didn't breed any of those other females. And so I reintroduced the females that he liked from the beginning, and they bred that season again. So that's where I kind of came up with the philosophy that they kind of, they kind of bond, and they may have some level of recognizing each other, and so it's, it's not like just breeding dogs, or even pythons for that matter.
I know I heard over the years that with shinglebacks, that was one of the issues of people in the United States struggling to get theirs to breed because the animals they were coming in were foreign to each other, I guess you could say. And there was
Yes.
a study I read in the wild that they essentially bond for life. I want to say that their radius or the distance they were willing to travel was either 2 or 4 miles every year to find each other. But
Yes.
then I did speak with a guy in the United States this year that is working with shingles, and he's been very successful introducing males to females that aren't used to each other and to get babies. So I don't know if it'd be the same with that, if that was a guarantee they bond, or with your case, your male just happened to find 2 girls and ignored everybody else.
Well, and a nice friend of mine, John Can in Australia, he was one of the folks from the more academia side that backed me up at some of these herp festivals. Because when these curators reptiles were laughing at me about suggesting that they bond or they may be monogamous or recognize each other, John Can stepped up and backed me up, and he said he saw locale specific males and females where they don't live with each other, that males seeked out those females every year, passing up dozens of other females en route, and that they're locale specific bonded animals. It may not be a one-on-one thing, one-to-one. It might be 1.2, just like with these guys. I haven't found them to be monogamous on a 1.1 setting, but 1.2, and occasionally in one case I've had 1.3 where all females were bred, but it's not the norm, or I haven't found it to be the norm.
It somewhat sounds like an individual basis depending on the male. Some are more willing to date other girls, and some have their own preferences.
Well, and again, you got to have a fairly bold male, right? If you have a very shy, timid male, they're I rarely had them turn out to be good breeders because the females are already larger and stronger than the males in this species. I don't know if is that true of shinglebacks?
The size difference?
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, I would be lying if I told you.
Well,
I'm not 100% sure. Most breeding pairs I've seen have looked very similar in size.
right.
Of course, the males have more of a bigger, prominent head, but I can't be for sure at that. That's one species I've never been rich enough to own.
Okay. Yeah, because with these guys, the males are very slight, and I have a current setting. And I don't know if you guys seen the ones I have that are yellow-headed animals, yellow eyes, yellow heads, and the males are quite a bit smaller and slight, and it's a big, a big female to breed, and it's not happening, and I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but. There are large males and smaller females, but in general, the females are larger, more robust, stronger animals than the males, all the way around. Which is one of the ways I used to sex them as well. So within that baby group, you can see the ones that put on more weight and a little bit heavier, even blindfold on, I can tell which ones are the females just by the way they feel.
Interesting. Have you ever made it to the Solomon Islands yourself to kind of look around and just take it all in?
I would love to. That's why I was talking with some folks. Like, boy, in the past, I've had chances to go to Galapagos and Madagascar, and I would really rather go to the Solomon Islands. I think their flora and fauna are pretty incredible all in itself, and especially with this species. And to physically see, because they have plenty of other things. There, coconut crabs, monitor lizards, cockatoos. Their bird fauna is pretty, and fish. Everything's pretty incredible in the Solomons. I can't imagine it being too expensive to go either.
I wouldn't think. It's just finding the right guy to take you around when you get there.
Yes. So, which I haven't seen too many of those, curator-led, groups going. I would love to have somebody who is a nice expert on the Solomons that would lead the trip versus me, walking around blindly.
Sounds like Kirpin, buddy. Why not do it?
Yes, it would be nice. That would be something that if someone out there wants to organize a trip, I would be interested in going to something like that.
Okay.
But each island is uniquely different. I was reading a little bit more about even the people, a little bit different, cultures a little bit different from island to island, and the way that they even view this species is a little bit different too. Some of the islands, the people eat them. They throw them on the fire and eat them. Other islands, it's taboo to mess with them. So it's quite a bit different culturally.
So really quick, and we're going to keep on jumping back to the breeding part of it. So for anybody who's thinking about working with the species, would you encourage them to start out with a known pair, start out with babies and raise them together and kind of get them used to each other? Like, what would you suggest?
Well, obviously today in time, it's a pretty good financial investment. If they were lucky enough to get into them, say 4 years ago, well, it still would have been over $1,000 a baby. And generally, babies today are going to be reaching, hitting about $2,000 for a true captive bred anyway. There's plenty out there being represented as captive bred that are obviously wild caught. Behaviorally is a big giveaway. Their behavior. There's things like on this one, if you can see, you can rub his head, rub his lip, and he's not going to chomp into you. And doing that with a import is likely going to result in a pretty nasty bite. Their teeth are small but very sharp. So I know there's plenty of folks out there that keep them that have been bitten really bad, and it's one of the more painful bites.
It's the jaw strength. One of the worst bites I've ever had in the hobby was a leopard gecko.
Yes.
It grabbed on and it would not let go. It was horrible.
Yes. But these guys have sharp teeth, and I kind of dub them leaf-eating skinks too. So if you're seeing them bite into a tough leaf, it just makes a big old hole punch cut right into that leaf with those little teeth. And then usually it's like getting hit with a razor blade. It cuts you open pretty bad, and you're going to bleed pretty good with a very aggressive bite, because they do warning bites too, by the way.
Okay.
When I'm in the cage, they do these little where they just ram you with their nose, where it's kind of to get you out of there versus an aggressive bite.
Okay. Go ahead, bud.
So on your more males that are more timid breeders, have you found any tricks that get them to breed more effective?
I typically remove them and send them up with a more appropriate mate in size for them, because I have little animals too. Some of the, these animals, I remember talking to people claiming that theirs were over 3 feet and 1,000 grams. And I go, wow, I would really like to see that. Not that I'm denying it's possible. There could be the Andre the Giant of the prehensile tail skinks out there, I'm sure. But in general, the largest animal I think I've seen was only about 850 grams, which is pretty large for this species. And most of my animals are sitting around this 500 to 600 grams. That's Corucia zebrata, right? And the majority of are 500 to 600 grams. I think I have one that's 700 grams. But the size compatibility seems to be important too on there. I haven't seen too many or experienced too much success with a large female set up with a little male. They just don't line up. He would have to essentially bite her in the middle of her back, in mid-back, to line up with her. So on the closely matched in size animals, he's typically biting her on her lower neck, holding her, and breeding just pretty much like Lutons do. The size disparaging difference is rarely, for compatibility, for companionship, that's fine, but for breeding, it's tough.
Have you noticed a structure or an area in your cages that they typically lock Like, are they always up on a tree branch? Are they in the cork bark? Do you find them on the floor? Like, where do they typically lock?
It's typically when it's dark, you know, and I don't think I mentioned, I keep all my cages are on reverse light system. It's dark during the day and light at night. So I reverse the light system on there. And only, you know, so when I'm on the weekends, I'm working in there and they're active, I can mess with them. I can go in there and change waters and do stuff in there when the lights are on. They're very inactive when the lights are on. Not to say that every one of them is going to be inactive. So I put on reverse light system, especially on heat during the winter time. You know, lighting. You know, having the lights go on at nighttime is when I need the light in the room anyway. But the typically at the bottom of the cage or on a flat surface. So you imagine this animal is an arboreal animal, nocturnal boreal animal. There's not going to be a whole lot of horizontal spaces. Maybe a branch that might get out horizontally, but I don't. I haven't quite seen it where they're breeding vertically or even diagonally. It's usually typically very close to horizontal, either on a ramp. I have ramps and shelves inside the cage. That's why the bottom is usually the one reliable flat spot. But it's typically all happening at nighttime. So that's why I think maybe the zoos maybe didn't have a lot of data because nobody's staring at them in darkness at the zoo. I'm guessing. So I just had the luxury of the cage being right next to where I slept.
Okay.
Have you noticed any negative effects switching the light cycle, or the room they in pretty much no windows?
No, it's something I kind of got used to doing, and I don't think it's really even been proven that this species needs UVB bulbs. Uh, you know, for the last animal that was turned over to me, they didn't have any UVB bulb. They didn't even have a heat bulb. It was just raised in a room. Uh, and I guess there might have been some heat and light coming from a window. But the animal seems relatively healthy, you know, very antisocial, but healthy. So I run a UVB bulb. So I use Arcadia brands. Zoom In makes nice bulbs too. I just kind of got used to Arcadia's. So when the lights first go on, um, it's when the lights go on is when the sun's setting, right? So it's getting a little bit of dim light, and so the first stage is a 2.0 or 3.0 UVB bulb, and then the next hour the 5.0 goes on, and it's at the top. So if they don't like the light, they can go to the bottom, which is very dark. There's a heat spot, right? Which they generally only go to that spot if the room's too cold. You know, or they just ate a pretty good meal and they need that basking area. But as a nocturnal species, they're not crazy about UVB. I think they still need it. And I was just talking to Dale here with his geckos, which are primarily nocturnal. They they have options of hiding under stuff, but they come right out and under the UVB bulb. So I think even nocturnal animals need some UV exposure, even
Are
if it's
they
1 hour.
are they fully basking under the UVB, or are they more like cryptic basking?
So I generally have the heat at the top. I have the ledge or shelf, which is about 12 inches away, and then a half cave, so they can get above it to get heat. They can get underneath it to get heat, but no light. So I give them those multi options, and all the way down there's heat on hiding spots all the way down to the bottom. So they're rarely at the bottom, you know. So
Okay.
we put feeding stations at multiple levels as well.
Now, when babies are born, do they eat their yolk sac?
Do the babies eat it? Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking? So it's hard to determine. So because we don't know exactly when the baby's going to be born, and many times I walk in the cage, change the water, and discover a baby. Sometimes I find a fresh baby which has that birth shed. So as soon as they're born, they're shedding, right? Sometimes I discover them, maybe a week later after it's all been sloughed off. But they are born with a placenta, just like a mammal, and I call them the most mammalian-like reptile that exists. You know, they either born live, then there's parental care. They're born with a placenta. They have a long gestation. Uh, um, um, so they're very mammal-like.
So if you find a baby running around with it still attached, do you do anything special?
I try not to rush in because, and many have had this experience, and up to about a year ago, I never experienced it, but I experienced it that time. I go in there, obviously to maybe change water, upset the parents. The baby gets scared and tries to go hide, and all of a sudden, one of the parents chomps down on the baby. And so I try not to mess with the baby unless it's necessary. And there's different philosophies on checking the baby and examining it and whatnot. But unless the baby's right at the front of the cage where I can grab it undetected by the adults, I don't go tearing the cage apart to grab that baby. It usually does more harm.
So
You
then,
can usually tell too if the baby's running away and fast, it's in pretty good shape. If it's laying there still, it's in bad shape.
so do you usually see them eating off the parents' food then, or are they?
Yeah,
What are
they're big poop eaters. That's one of the advantage of keeping the babies with the parents. And like I said, I keep them for a year before I part with them, and I kind of joke with people. I pretty much give the babies away. You're just paying me for room and board for a year to 2 years to raise this baby, and but they survive heavily on the parents' poop. The placenta, I don't know. It's being absorbed, by. Sometimes they're born premature with a giant yolk sac coming out, but generally, ideally, when they're born, that's pretty much absorbed pretty heavily already.
That's weird because I guess I'm just used to blue tongues where, first thing they'll bite that off, tear it off, and that's their first meal.
Well, they could, because that's just, they can be doing that in secrecy where I don't even detect it. So, because they're animal that hides pretty heavily. That's as babies, and that's why finding babies generally at the bottom or under things hiding. That's because I think it would be easy prey for something else to eat.
So are they able to, well, and I guess you got multiple levels, so they're even able to bask lower, kind of where they still feel safe.
Yeah, they can go different levels. I think, offering different options and not just having a thermal gradient. I like having a light gradient too, right? Because not all animals like bright light. Not all animals like it warm, and the males, all my dominant males, usually take the top spot. Right? It's ironic because I provide a top shelf, medium shelf, lower shelves, and the dominant male, even with babies, the dominant male will establish as that being his spot, the top spot. Not necessarily the best basking spot, but the highest spot.
Just for
I
best vantage point, or
I don't know. It's just it's uh, walking through the cages every day or twice a day. So there he is again, right on the top left shelf, uh, and um, but the most protective animals with the babies aren't normally the males; it's the females. The females are the ones who probably do the most damage to you when there's a baby.
now, um, sorry. For new keepers, would you suggest they keep like a divider? That way they could separate the male and the female if they need to?
Yes, so the ideal setup, and it get a little pricey, but I look at enclosures being an investment. So the one of the cages I just drafted up and given to Dale here is a larger cage with a solid divider with a guillotine door that you can remove. You can replace have that door being a solid piece door, You can have it turn into a mesh store so they can see and smell each other. So it gives that flexibility on how that cage can be used. The introduction, again, if they're already coming from a colony of babies, introducing it even to another animal should be easy. If that animal is raised in solitary in 2 and 3 years, and you want to throw 2 animals from 2 different locales raised in solitary together, that's going to be challenging. It doesn't mean it won't work, but it's going to take some time. You just can't put them together.
I might have missed this part of the conversation, but have you ever lost any limbs because of animals not doing well together?
Has the skinks lost any limbs?
Yeah, like, with northerns, sometimes, you look like you're doing okay. I've been watching you get around over there, but yeah, have you ever had like one maybe grab onto an arm, maybe lose the tip of a tail, anything like that over the years?
Yes. So remember, I worked at an importer, and back in the day, we didn't know that much about it, and then nobody did. And so when a large number came in, they go in one giant walk-in cage. And I remember some of the old keepers, that's how they kept them in big, like aviary-style cages, piled in with 20 males and 20 females, right? And at that last Daytona show, one guy told me he had 20.20. And I says, "You're kidding. Was that disastrous?" He goes, No, they all bred. I says, "Are you sure? The males didn't fight at 20.20? So, I don't know. I guess anything's possible. But males, if you get 2 dominant male, imagine having 2 dominant male lions in a pride, right? There's going to be some fighting until somebody backs down. And if they don't back down, somebody's going to get very severely injured. And that happens with this. So there have been animals with, even in shipping, that arrive with fingers missing, arrive with a hand, damaged or chewed up. So they will. They're not. Doesn't mean that they won't get along from being one side of the cage and another being another, but squeezed together and forced to be in close confines with each other, it rarely turns out nice.
Okay.
But I have some ISA males too. Many of the ones that I may surplus out would be are heavily males, and generally the males I hang on to are usually the more dominant, friendly males.
Okay. And do you find that your more submissive males or calmer ones make bad breeders, or do you find that doesn't make a difference with the species?
I think if you set the male up, so just like breeding some birds, like eclectus parrots, I think it's important to have a younger, less mature and smaller male set up with a larger female. Not incredibly large, but slightly more mature, right? So that's why if I'm going to set up young animals where I know the sex, there'll be a 2-year-old male with a 3-year-old female, right? She's gonna always remain bigger in general, but generally I want her, at least a year older and bigger than the male, not the other way around.
So
I've seen folks set up these 10-year-old males with a 2-year-old female, and I can't say I would recommend that.
The enclosure you have behind you right now, is that a 1.2 enclosure, or what's that setup behind you?
So I'm at Chimera Designs. I'm not at home right now, so I'm at Chimera Designs. He's in LA. That's I think it's a single spiny tail banana. Banana iguana. But that cage would easily be very simple. Actually, it's very similar to the cages I keep the Corucia in.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you were talking pricing earlier, and I jump all over the place, by the way.
That's okay. I can keep up.
Tell us about pricing in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, the late 2000s, because I know that species has done one of these over the years.
It sure has. It was incredible. I said it became so common. Like I said before, it became so common. Some of these hardcore breeders of, many were Burmese python breeders, or we're calling them junk animals because they weren't very expensive. So once upon a time, and I guess there might be some Gen Z or millennials that are going to scream, they were as little as like $35 wholesale.
Yeah. I know in the 2000s, I feel like the price was in the $400 to $600 range for a long time there.
For for fresh imports. That would have been
For
that,
imports,
right?
yes.
And it's usually weren't the pretty ones either. So then fresh imports, and a lot of those imports come in pretty rough shape. And not bagging on any importer, but it's their journey is a long journey. I think from the time they're captured, thrown in a box, from the to the time they're opened up on the receiving end might be over a week.
Yep. You can run into dehydration with the animals. If they collect them a week before shipping, they probably don't have them set up over that week.
Yeah,
You never really know.
Yes, because they got to go through a long journey just to get to Bougainville Airport. So if they're packed on one island, they take a slow boat trip over, shipped over. It's got to hop from one country because I don't think it's coming directly from the Solomons to the U.S. I think it's stopping somewhere else, and hopefully it's during a nice time of year where it's not too hot or too cold. But I've been bitten by some of those animals right out of the box, and that's probably the worst time to ever get bit by them because they're eating poop. They're surviving on poop. So their teeth are all black from poop, and if you get bit by that, that's you're generally going to get a pretty good infection.
Interesting. So if you starve your animal in captivity, will it resort to eating its own feces also, or there's something about that?
They're pretty resourceful, and usually it's a last resort because I keep a bioactive cage bottom, so I have little isopods at the bottom. So they're consuming a lot of the wasted food and some of the poop, and so the bottom's kept pretty neat with the isopods consuming a lot of the waste. But I don't see them really eating poop other than the babies. When the babies eat the poop, and usually it's on a shelf, on the top shelf, and they're seeing the poop right there, and they go for it. But normally, if they're well fed, they don't try to eat. The dogs don't eat the poop.
Okay.
So what do you feed them to? We'll call them well feed them.
Well,
diverse diet.
There's a giant list I use. So and they're leaf eaters, right? I tell people they're leaf eaters, not big fruit eaters, right? They're vegetable and fruit eaters, not fruit and vegetable. So they will eat fruit. They like bananas, but that should by no means be the primary part of their diet. But they're heavy leaf eaters. So I use a lot of dark leafy green vegetables. And my prior background, even before I got into this species, was I was more into turtles and tortoises. So feeding them was a piece of cake. If you had tortoises, it's just a handful of the food I would have fed the tortoises. So leafy green veggies. I live in Southern California where we have a large wholesale produce market. I'm buying boxes and boxes of produce every single week, and there's. I wish it was just one type of veggie I use, but I don't. There's probably a dozen base vegetables I use with another 10, periodic things I use. So dandelion greens, I use collard greens, kale. There's even Asian markets here that I pick up bok choy and various other things. So I try to avoid using one veggie that they get imprinted on. Right, and so I hear a lot of folks like to use romaine, but in the tortoise world, we know that vegetable will be one of the lowest in nutritional value. Right, it's got some fiber, but it's pretty much just getting water, and they'll eat it. But I try to use a large variety, including things I grow myself. So some folks have been in my yard and seen it, but I have 40 hibiscus shrubs, bushes. So they eat the leaves and the flowers. Mulberry, they love the leaves on that one and the fruit. Cactus pads, so I slice those up. They eat that as well. Some of the things that they don't like, and other folks that get their animals to eat it, is like mustard greens and turnip greens, and mine don't tend to favor those very much. So it's and even within group to group and individual, some animals might like mulberry, for instance, and some may hate it. So each animal has a different taste, I suppose. Bananas, if you have animals reluctant to eat, bananas tend to be a good segue to get, especially if anyone's dealing with rehabbing animals or freshly imported animals that don't want to eat. Bananas tend to be a good go-to. And then once a week they get Pangea. I give them a little treat of Pangea that they use for, typically used for uncrested geckos.
Yeah. Do you ever do mango or anything like that with the species?
I do. That's one of the available fruit all year round in Southern California, and that's one of the toss-ups. Sometimes some love it and some just won't ever touch it. Papaya seems to be a little bit more accepting for most of them over mango.
Right.
We get both the Hawaiian mangoes and the giant Mexican mangoes.
Right. Are you adding any supplements to your diet?
Yeah, so about once a week. I'm typically, and there's a lot of choices out there. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but I use a lot of mineral. It's a calcium supplement. I think I also use Repcal, which is one of the old school guys that, they just do Repcal, which is a calcium carbonate, calcium supplement. And I use that because I acknowledge that commercial produce is low in calcium. It is. So vitamin supplements, I do that once a week too. But I'm making big bats, so I'm not making a little bowl of food at a time. I'm making a big giant 30-gallon trash can full of veggies. Several times a week.
What
How
about
many?
tortoise diets?
Huh?
What about any of like the Missouri tortoise diets or any of those?
I may use those on some of the tortoises, but if you look at Missouri, and I'm not bashing them, it's primarily corn. So basically a cornmeal nugget, a high fiber kind of thing. I choose not to use it. I don't find it necessary. They'll eat it, they'll definitely eat it like monkey chow. They'll eat it, but I try to rely on fresh, fresh products. So I don't even eat shish. If I throw a whole sweet potato in there, not even sliced, and I'm gone for the day, it'll be gnawed up by the time I get back. So they're acknowledging eating that. I don't even slice it.
Do you boil it or is it going in raw?
I sometimes boil it slightly, right, to soften a little bit. But if I put in the raw, they'll eat it raw. But I'll generally dip it, I'll blanch it, dip it in boiling water, just primarily clean it and soften the ends. But they'll go and gnaw it.
Okay.
Leave it there long enough, it'll be completely gone. Carrots, whole carrot, I usually shred it or slice it. They'll eat that too.
All right. So talking bioactives, are there any kind of plants you put in there that you want them to eat, and do you avoid other plants that they shouldn't be eating?
You mean keeping plants in the enclosure for
Yeah.
decoration? No, I don't do that. It's a never-ending battle. It'll be destroyed. If you have a large enough walk-in cage, I suppose that can work on established plants. So I don't keep any plants in there, and I usually discourage folks from putting artificial plants in as well, because not saying they're dumb, but this species will sometimes eat those plastic plants. And we have members that say, "Oh yeah, my skink was fine for 10 years, and all of a sudden this year it ate those plastic plants, and now it's got intestinal blockage, and I had to go to the vet, or they die." And so I don't put it in there. I don't use any of those plastic or silk plants. And I'll criticize anyone who does, but I choose not to, just from take those extra precautions. I don't find it necessary. I want to tip on this one too. So pothos, Epiprinium, is a species that they're known to consume in the Solomons. Not necessarily the exact species available at the nursery, but they can eat it. But I discourage folks from going to the Home Depot, buying one, and throwing it in the cage for their skink to eat it that day, right? Because they're typically sprayed. So it's not the plant I caution people about; it's the spray, right? So as the administrator of the Prince-Tail Skink Group, and especially me being Californian, we're in a very litigious state. I don't want to be responsible for stupidity. Someone going to the Home Depot buying a chemically sprayed plant, feeding it to their skink, and that skink gets sick. So that's where I'm not opposed to people feeding it. I just I won't recommend it, just tell someone to do it unless I know and they know don't feed fresh plants.
Okay.
If you raise it yourself and it's clean, and that's fine. But generally, there's chemical sprays on it.
What about like some of those companies use like fertilizers and stuff, or any of those you got to worry about?
Yes, I'm also in the soil that they use too. So I said, if you're going to buy a pothos plant Epiprinium, get home, repot it, rinse off the leaves. I suggest keeping it for a month and spraying it and rinsing it for over a month before you even consider feeding it. So you're going to get new growth anyway. So, but I wouldn't feed a fresh plant.
Okay. So you discussed getting an animal that was raised for, I think you said almost 10 years before you got it. No special lighting, no nothing. Do you have any idea what the diet was for that animal that they were able to survive?
Well, I think it got a lot of the D3 through the supplementation, because it sounded like it was primarily eating romaine lettuce and spinach and just regular commercial vegetables and sprinkled with supplementation. So whatever D3, if it's true that the species needs some, it was getting it through that supplementation, because I would think it may have metabolic bone disease or be some nutritional thing. It was dry. The wire cage thing. Even I used to keep them in wire cages, but it's in a normal setting, it's hard to get that humidity there. But supplementation, I'm kind of torn, because a lot of the vitamins in the supplements are synthetic anyway.
Okay.
Calcium generally not synthetic, and vitamin C is not synthetic, but a lot of the vitamin B is synthetic and whatnot.
All right. So discussing humidity and caging and all that. Oh man, I'm gonna throw myself off that intro to that question. Okay, wash me, Alex. Your turn. I completely just blanked my mind. I'm gonna come right back.
So quickly on feeding, how frequently are you doing? Every day, every other day, 3 times a week?
What are we talking about, feeding?
Yeah.
So depending on the animal, if they're babies, I try to feed them daily. If they're big fat adults, maybe every other day. If they're pregnant females, I try to check on them every day and feed them, because they're eating when they're really at the peak of their delivering, they're eating so slightly, right? And so I don't want them to miss a meal. Males being skinny, males have to be quicker and lighter, and they should eat pretty much daily too. But if they get a good meal into them, because sometimes they gorge. If there are a lot of bananas there, they might gorge so much they end up throwing it up.
So I did remember my question. So we've been discussing humidity.
Yes.
What are some signs with the animal that your humidity is too low? Is it bad sheds? Is it shed stuck on the toes? Like, what are the details you look for?
So you're correct on both of those. So the skin quality, and again, each one of my cages differs from the next one. And I recently posted a picture of shiny, smooth scales, like the scales babies have. It's very shiny, iridescent, like a python, like shiny python scales. In a situation where it's too dry, they'll have these wrinkled scales. It'd actually be very wrinkled, and in some cases, and even on one of the ones that were turned over to me, it had 2 dry sheds on it, back to back, and missing toes. Usually the missing toes is often, not always, often the result of a dry shed toe ring. Right, so imagine a dry shed that got tighter and tighter, and that shed came along, became like a ring, and cut off the circulation and lost their toenails.
Yeah, that used to be a thing in boa constrictors when I grew up. If you got a boa constrictor, the tip of its tail had a little bone exposed. Yes. It was from humidity being too low, a little bit holding on, the circulation not being there. Yeah.
Right. And so in this species, it's almost impossible to have it too wet unless you drop it in a fish tank. But it's almost impossible to have the cage too wet. And like I say, the quarantine cage, I keep them in the tub. It's a really wet environment because I'm in there regularly spraying. There's no substrate on there. There's hiding places, the water dish, it's a few branches, but it's constantly wet inside there. And they almost some of them do actually better in that setup than they do in the enclosure, because of that wetness. So that's why I no longer use wooden cages. I talked about some of my old cages. Some of my first generation cages are wood and PVC coated, 1 inch by ½ inch aviary wire. But that's the ones that had shedding issues. And so even animals that I have that do go through a shed, there might be little patches that are left remaining. I take them out after that. I give them a nice bath. I check them all over, make sure all the shed came out, and in some cases I rub them down with coconut oil.
All right. So. Interesting.
For respiratory issues, how do you detect those on like the low end?
In established captive animals, you should probably never experience that. You would have to keep them really, really cold because I think my cages dip into 70 or even slightly below 70 at nighttime during the winter, right? And I don't worry about it because there's still a warm spot. So there's a cold spot, warm spot. In cases with upper respiratory thing, which should not be confused from a nasal blockage. So if you keep substrate or whatnot, they got little tiny nostrils, just like blue tongues, but things can get stuck in there. And if there's a dry shed in their nostril and that goes back to back with the next one, there can be some, nasal blockage. The only way of getting that out is soaking them and somehow grabbing it and pulling it out. That's why I use that coconut oil. I use not cooking coconut oil, but the really diluted they use for skin. So it softens all those if there's anything remaining on the toes or in the armpits, tip of the tail, it loosens it up really nicely. So, and it's not toxic too. So.
Trying to think what to ask about that. How about this? Are there any known viruses that are making their way through the monkey stink community at all? Anything that you guys know from the wild that came in?
Not that I know of. Most of the animals that come in poor shape, it's generally due to stress and dehydration and malnourishment. And it's an incredible animal that, boy, I see them in rough shape. Animals that got turned over to me that whatever it was work, you've got to keep trying different things because, again, one of the animals turned over to me was not eating. I didn't think it was going to survive. And just had to figure out. And I put them in solitary, got them figuring out what it likes and what it didn't like, and it's back into business now. And but it's very weak still and very little. But sometimes there's animals that, just like any other species, that there's going to be stronger individuals that are raised the same exact way of animals that are in great shape. Weak animals and strong animals raised the same exact way, and for whatever reason, some individuals don't respond.
Okay. Well, I mean, in the wild, there are viruses and bacteria that do, in a sense, control populations, almost Mother Nature's way of keeping things in check. And even with an animal with a virus or a bacteria or whatever else in captivity, there's like a tipping point that makes them sick is what I'm looking for. It could always be there, but something about our conditions can actually make the animal start shedding that virus. The bacteria could build up so much in their system. So I lost them. Can you hear me, Eric? Can't hear me. Can you hear me, Alex?
I could hear you. I heard like a little laugh that I thought sounded like him, but maybe not.
Might have been me. I do a lot of ventriloquist stuff, so I can keep my mouth closed and giggle, and you wouldn't even know it was me.
Okay.
Yeah. So, how have you been, buddy?
Good.
Good.
Surgery Friday.
Okay. What part?
I am getting the So they put in 3 plates in my left shoulder. They're taking 1 of the 3 out.
Okay. Okay. That's real. You want to talk about it?
It's not super exciting. It's a plate that hooks the bone down, and for whatever reason, it causes pain long term, so they take it out.
Okay. Okay.
So
Wow.
I'll feel like crap a couple days, but in the grand scheme, it'll be all right.
Yeah. Power through, buddy. Power through. Should you think he's ever going to come back? It's hard to say. It's hard to say.
I
He
think.
might.
One sec. There's 2 of them
New
now.
Eric? Okay, new Eric. Get rid of old Eric.
I don't
Yeah.
know how that happened. Oh, there we go. All right. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Viruses. I think we were on.
Yeah.
I have
Well-
not. I have.
Might have froze again.
So we got you now, buddy. Put some words out there. Let's see how it sounds. No. It's worse.
We could see you, but can't hear you.
Yeah. Did you hit the mute button? Do a gentle hum with your voice until we hear you.
I don't know if this.
Well, you know, when you go live with these things, you got to expect things to go wrong sometimes.
I don't know if the other one being there messes with it or not.
It's hard to say.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Can you
We
hear
know
it?
sign language. Can you hear the words coming out of my mouth? I don't think he's getting anything, but he's not even moving his mouth.
I'm gonna try kicking you, Eric. If you want to try rejoining on that link,
Gone.
hopefully he comes back.
Hopefully. So I got to join one of these monkey tail skink groups. I find all this very fascinating. I feel like Jordan Russell back in the day would post pictures. And in my head, I keep on seeing this image of like a yellow phase and a green phase and an orange phase monkey tail. I can see it. I just don't remember who posted that image. I want to say it was Jordan Russell. Alex, am I talking to myself now?
No, I'm listening. I'm going over to my other tab to message him just to let him know.
No, it's fair, buddy. I get it. I'm just going to sit here and look pretty for everybody who's listening.
Also, there used to be an anery that was floating around that I see someone at least bought, and a potential hypo that might be a patternless.
Interesting. Well, you know, every once in a while we talk about genetic diversity in the wild, and when you have a species that inbreeds a lot in a small area, you're bound to get a mutation popping up. Just a matter of how strong that mutation is going to be. Considering these guys are living in trees, there's probably a few mutations out there that we just don't even know about yet. Whether or not they were strong enough to survive is the whole thing.
Good.
Good.
Perfect.
All right. Is that better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think your computer got a virus and we lost you.
Oh boy, viruses. I don't need those. The difference I've seen where people had issues, they were mixing species, right? So they had Prinzos mixed with, say, I don't know, Sudan Plato lizards, hypothetically, right? And so one of the things I learned right from the organizations I work for is not to mix continents, and it's not necessary to always to mix species, even from the same continent. They may not be compatible, especially in a smaller environment compared to what they would typically be from. But mixing continents is typically runs is a major problem. So a very common thing happening here in California. California desert tortoises are mixing it with leopard tortoises or Russian tortoises. And remember, poop eaters, if they're eating each other's poop, they're really passing on a lot of things. Parasites for one, all different types of parasites, but unknown viruses too. So with all my skink groups, they're just that one species. At the very beginning, I contemplated mixing the Solomon Island giant ground skink. Seemed pretty innocent, but being the males getting territorial, I've had situations where they'll attack those guys too. Because again, that's another foreign invader in their book when they get into breeding mode. Because they're very tribal, right? So with their own group, they're fine, and even within their own species, there's animals that other animals they may not like. Like, I suggested earlier that trying to introduce a second female to a pair isn't as easy as it sounds.
Interesting.
So, because both the existing male and female have to accept it. It's not easy.
Okay. So when I would think outbreeding would make them not want to eat each other's poop, inbreeding I would think over time would make them more like Randy's and want to eat each other's poop. But that's just me. I don't really know a lot about what I'm talking about.
Now, what about parasites coming in from the wild? How do you treat for those?
That was broken up.
Oh, so how do you treat for parasites?
Can you hear?
Oh God, I feel
parasites?
Yeah.
Parasites.
With any imports, reptile imports, it's always good, I think, to get a fecal exam, maybe a trip to the vet. If they're imports, and which typically you're not going to see imports, captive bred animals, and they're usually really robust, big, chubby little animals. The existing groups I have, I don't even worry about going to the vet unless there was something major wrong. Potentially a female that maybe have a egg, unfertilized egg stuck. I've had other issues where the babies were stuck, born breech. We had to get assistance to get that baby out. Otherwise, we're going to lose the mother and the baby.
Is that common to happen for them to breach?
Still there?
Yeah, is it common for that to happen for females to have issues giving birth?
I'm scared we've lost the good connection.
All right, let me see if I push it closer to the door. I don't know if that's going to make any difference at all. A little message came up to move closer to the.
We could try signing out and signing in one more time, or repeat.
Maybe.
It's 20 minutes shy of the goal.
Does that make any difference up there?
You talk to us for a moment. Do you hear us okay? Just making a poop face, buddy. I don't think you can hear me.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Better? No?
I think it's okay. As long as you can hear us.
All right. I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Well, we can start over wherever we want now. I feel like we're fresh.
I'll let you start, Dave.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, did you specify enclosure size earlier?
That might have been off air.
Hey, Eric, can you hear me okay? It's gonna be really good if he's. I feel like we're treating this like an old TV set right now.
Hey, we still got 16 people here.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, how you doing, Jay? Appreciate you tuning in, bud.
I'm closer to the door.
All right. We're going to try this one more time, Eric. You got us okay? I think it's over, buddy.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I was asking about enclosure size. Did you specify enclosure size recommended?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so for the young ones, I do typically 2x2 bays, 4 foot tall. As it graduates, I push it to 4x4 by 2 foot deep. Bigger cages, and some folks kind of lose their mind that says I should be giving them 8 foot cages, and I goes, well, if I had one pair, that would be nice, but with the numbers of colonies I have going, there wouldn't be too much living space if I had 8 foot cages for every trio. But it comes down to compatibility, like I was mentioning earlier. Compatibility is the key, more than just with this species. If they like each other, they're not running around attacking each other. They're very calm, very complacent animals. Even in a large cage, they don't do a whole lot. They come down to eat, they go down to poop, maybe mess around in the water and use the water pan as a toilet. And for the most part, we spoke about poop earlier. They use that water pan as a toilet. I pretty much have to change it during the summertime twice a day. So imagine having, multiple enclosures with poop water in it. It's tough. But the 4 foot cage, I think the one in the back and the one in front of me, 4 foot seems to be a nice standard. I like 4 foot tall, even if it's not 4 foot wide. It seems to be a nice size. I'm envious of folks have one pair that have walk-in cages or aviaries or whatnot. They're nice, but it's not physically possible to have dozens of 8 foot cages set up like that. Okay. But again, if they're compatible, they don't need that. If they're uncompatible, an 8 foot cage would still not be big enough.
Do you know the type of tree that they typically live in the wild? Okay. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me now? All right, buddy. I think we peaked.
Yeah, it sounds like you're losing service near the end, Eric.
Yeah. How about this? I'm gonna alpha male the situation. Hey, Eric, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Well, thank you for coming on, Eric, if you're able to hear us.
Yeah, maybe let's just keep going with this dead air for a second, and then we'll say a proper goodbye. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah, it's really sad. I wanted to talk about lizard lover, but, I guess we're going to save that for the next one. You know about that lizard lover, Alex?
Lizard lover?
You don't know about lizard lover?
No.
It's a real shame, buddy. I thought you were in the community.
Is that Jay?
No, it's a guy that legally changed his name to Lizard Lover.
Oh.
He was in one of the early Herpers DVDs with Dave Kaufman. He had monkey tails living in his bathroom, basilisk. It was quite wonderful, actually. Have you ever seen the calendars of the iguanas posing away where they're cuddling each other on little sofas?
No.
Okay, maybe they're not iguanas. Maybe they were basilisks. And if they're not basilisks, they were something else. I'm going to share that with you after this. You're going to love that. I'm pretty sure he's from California, too. I was hoping these guys maybe talked at least
Oh, is
once.
that what happened? Okay.
Oh, shit.
I think we covered quite a bit of topics.
Yeah. Oh, did you finish?
No, but we doing them there, what, hour and a half, hour, 40 minutes?
Yeah, so,
You want to say
before he says something racist, maybe we should end this episode.
Yeah, let's try.
Yeah, I was watching it.
I'd be scared if we got demonetized. All right, Alex, roll us out. He doesn't even know it's on anymore, buddy. It's over.
Here, I got him booted out.
Don't say it like that. That
Well,
sounds weird.
Or maybe, I don't know. Looking at it, looks like he's leaving, taking off. I'll message him and thank him for coming.
Yeah. Well, no, we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah.
It was a good flow. We got a lot of information out there. We could have probably went for a little while longer, at least, 14 minutes.
I think he got tired of the technical difficulties and said, screw it.
It's fair enough, man. That's the generational gap.
Yep.
All right, man. Sound us off.
Well, thank you for everyone for coming, and thank you, Dave, for your help. I hope everyone has a great rest of your night, and thanks for stopping by.